It's great to be here. This is a topic that means a great deal to me. I spent a lot of time researching it and talking about it, so it's really a pleasure to be here. To demonstrate the commitment that the university has to sustainability, you should have been able to download the program and our bios upon checking in. If you're having problems with that, just turn to your tech-savvy neighbor and let that person help you have the information. So the good news is that I don't have to spend any time introducing anybody, so we can jump in. The flow for the evening is as follows. We're going to chat for about 35, 40 minutes, and then we're going to turn to you because we want your input. So we're going to do a quick digital poll, and then we're going to open it up for about 15 minutes of Q&A to get you involved. So that's where we're going, and our hope tonight is that we raise issues and challenges that have currency for you, and that we raise also questions that you might take out of the room tonight and reflect upon. So with that, we're just going to jump right in. And I'm going to ask each of my panelists this evening to talk about the first question. And that is, if you could give the audience a snapshot of the journey that you've taken that has led you to the work you're doing and a life of service. Let's start there. So,
all right.
Senator
Thank you, Carol. Thank you for having me. It is such a pleasure to be here. A snapshot. Well, the older you get, the longer your snapshot is. So I will try and condense my snapshot. I knew from a very young age that I wanted to do something that would help people. People are my passion. So I ended up ultimately going to school and getting my degree in communicative disorders. I wanted to be a speech therapist because I thought there are so many things that we will tolerate in society, but we don't tolerate when people can't effectively communicate. And I thought, I want to be that person to help people. I loved getting my degree. I loved doing that. Halfway through college, I got married. A couple of years later, I got pregnant. I ended up graduating 6 months pregnant with our twins, and never practiced being a speech therapist. But I got to do something else. I went to work for the union that I had been a member of for many years. We have some people that are a little older like me. Ever hear about Alpha Beta? Yes, okay. If I'm talking to young people, I can't say that because they're like, Alpha who? So it was a unionized grocery store. That is where I met my favorite husband. And we, after 31 years, he is my favorite. And when I was there working as a union member, I knew that I had a better job. We were 21 and 23. We were able to buy a house. That just doesn't happen anymore. So I ended up going to work for the union that I had been a member of. I started out as a temporary employee, but I quickly realized I wanted to be a union rep. I wanted to be out there helping people find their voice, especially the women. When you go to a grocery store, 50% plus of the membership are female. So I wanted to be a rep. The president of the union told me I could not, and he was, very clear. You can't do it because you're a woman. And I was like, oh, wow, well, that's very direct, okay. So he said, you can't do it because your husband will not be able to handle you working with all men, and you have 2-year-old twins. And I said, well, how about if we make a deal? I'll worry about my husband and my personal life, and you worry about my job performance. So I ultimately got the job as a rep. It's a whole book there, but I'm snapshot. So I loved it. I loved doing it. I went on to be the first woman president of that local because he died. And so
you want to say how?
I had a massive heart attack. I had nothing to do with that. He was out jogging. So I was the first and only president of a UFCW union in the state of California. And then I went on to be the president of the California Labor Federation, which represents 2.1 million workers in the state of California. I love my work, and thank you. I love my work in the labor movement because I used to say I think that a good job solves most of what ails us. Now I say a good job solves everything that ails us in society. I had an opportunity to run for the Senate in 2014, and I thought maybe I can help more people on a bigger level. I was lucky enough to get elected, to be reelected in 2018, and I love my job, and it's just an honor to get to serve the people of California every day.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Wonderful.
Snapshot.
Snapshot, good snapshot. So, Senator Gonzalez.
How do I beat that snapshot? That's a pretty good snapshot. That's right. Well, again, thank you as well for having me here. It's really great to have the invite and see all these amazing faces, some familiar, some not, so thank you for having me. So my snapshot, if you will, started with my mom. Like many of you, I have a very fierce mom who still yells at Meet the Press on Sundays. If you check her Twitter handle out, she's pretty fierce. She's always yelling at you-know-who, so she's amazing. But what I say is that she has been my rock, the person that has really started to implement, the idea of politics, but more so the idea of service, just serving our families, serving the community, always being involved every single Christmas, going to the food banks and making sure she's just present. And so just emulating that, seeing that really got me to where I'm at now. I was a mom at the age of 19 years old. And so I think that's another kind of highlight in my life that people can say, well, you can take this road or you can take that road. I took the right road. It took me 10 years to get through Cal State Long Beach, but with the perseverance of and certainly the encouragement of my parents, really enabled me to start looking at myself in a different way. So got a political science degree, ended up working in the city council in Long Beach for 5 years, making some really bold decisions in the underserved communities of Long Beach, and then decided to run for Senate. I worked at Microsoft at that time, so it was like, do I want to get a pay cut? I don't know if I want a pay cut, but maybe. So I got a pay cut, and I'm here gladly, but I'm doing it with all the right reasons and serving along some amazing women like Connie Leva. So thank you.
Lovely. Natalie.
Yes.
Natalie.
Really honored to be here. I'm a double Bruin who feels very welcome in this space. But I did put on this blue suit, just slid it in there. So thank you very much for having us and holding space for us. So really, that really resonated as well. Both of your stories really resonated. Mine as well, sort of my journey and it sort of being tethered to my role and the work that I do now did start in my childhood. I am an immigrant. I am the daughter of a single mother. I am from Beirut, Lebanon. I'm an Armenian American woman from Beirut, Lebanon. So when we escaped a civil war in Lebanon, and a story of immigration, of pursuing the American dream, of growing up in a single mother household, of being undocumented until my mid-teens, absolutely sort of shaped my story and my journey. The questions that it gave birth to were questions of policy, of politics, of public affairs, and a love that I developed for our democracy. Went to a little school in Westwood, then went up to do this incredible program right after undergrad called Coro. Didn't really know what I was getting into, but a professor of mine at that school in Westwood, Professor Dukakis, some of you might know him, said, you are unusually really curious about these policy questions. It's a little more curious than I've seen, and it felt like maybe a compliment and a slight. He said, I think you should check this program called Coro out, and I did. I went up to San Francisco and spent a year as a Coro Fellow in Public Affairs, and was transformed by that year. It really expanded my experiences and my worldview in an unparalleled way. Developed a deep love for the work that Coro was doing, and went on to practice law, but wanted to contribute and give back to Coro in any way that I could, and ultimately found myself in the CEO role. And just to share what Coro is and Coro does, so the organization was actually founded in the 40s in response to the rise of fascism abroad and the threat that it posed to our democracy. And the founders realized that we don't actually have an institution to train civic leaders in the way that we have in other fields, in medicine and in law, and that our democracy requires folks to step up and protect it and advance it, and wanted to create sort of an incubator and an institute to develop folks to build that muscle and do that work, to be able to collaborate across differences, be it ideological or beyond, to be able to come to common sense solutions, to be able to weather challenges and step up to be the problem solvers that we need for some of our most entrenched issues. So it is the honor of my life to be able to be in this seat and to give back to an organization that means so much, and in this moment in our time when our civil discourse seems more fractured than probably many of us remember it, the importance of continuing to do this kind of bridge building work.
Lovely, thank you. I just realized that we bookended ourselves with our colors, so this is pretty,
That's right.
unintended consequences.
Unintended.
So we've started to hear already about the influence of some of our resilient and tenacious moms. I share that story. And we also know from research and experience that in addition to the influences of our formative years, coaches, mentors, and champions have a huge impact on the development of who we are and what we do. So I'd like to hear from any one of you who have had some really important influencers or influences in your life that have helped shape who you are, in addition to your wonderful moms. So who would like to jump in first?
I
Senator
would say
Gonzalez?
I mean, I hate to say but my dad. He was a truck driver for 30 years. Hardworking, woke up at 1, 2 in the morning every morning, and I know a lot of us seem to have that story, but he was a big believer of empowerment for women, and he still is to this day. And that's what I really, really appreciate about him, is always encouraging me. When I was the only girl out there playing hockey, roller hockey, he was the one, out there kind of cheerleading on the sidelines for me, playing softball, and being sometimes the only girl on the softball team, or deciding to run for office. He was always there for me, and I think it's really great to have women influences, but it's even better sometimes to have male allies that can be there for you, kind of, rooting alongside you. And he sometimes doesn't know a lot about politics, even to this day, but he's getting into it. And I think that he has always just, been that kind of deep-hearted, honest person that has said, just do right by your community. And as simple as that is, and simplistic and honest as it is, it's just the best advice you can ever get. So,
Lovely. Anyone else? Natalie?
I would say, you know what, it was my mom and it was my dad, for many of the same reasons that Lena talked about. I'm a little older than our panelists, and there weren't really a lot of women mentors when I was growing up. My dad, same way, very big supporter of women, still asks me when I'm going to be president of the United States, and I'm like, yeah, Dad, even I can't fix that, sorry. But always believing in me and believing in what I could do, and it is nice to have male allies. And then seeing my mom just be the biggest champion of my brother and I really, I think, has shaped me on how I wanted to be as a mom. But what I also know is that I want to be a mentor for women. I want to be, if you don't have someone at home, it's my job to help make sure you find the best in you and know that you have something to offer. And I hope that I can be a mentor to someone someday.
Well, I trust, having sat in the green room with you, I trust you're already doing that. So.
she is.
And Natalie, is there anything you'd like to add? Or
I'd say similarly, my mother, a single mother at 19, who trekked across the world in pursuit of the American dream for a better future, and stands as a mentor and a model in her resilience and in her courage and in her search for better. And with that, I'd say there have been many mentors along the way in sort of almost every role that I've held. But I'll add to that I've always asked for it too, and I think that's an important thing to really name. Is that as women, we should have the courage to ask other women to mentor us, to hold us, to teach us, and to grow us, and sometimes all it takes is that ask.
Yeah. Great point.
Yeah, really important point. And we'll say that for those of you who are in earlier stages of your career, sometimes there's a difference between a mentor and a champion. A champion can be anyone in an organization who sees something in you and pushes you well beyond what you think you're capable of. And I can personally say that I had a champion way back when who saw things that I never saw and said, you're going to do it. And so I think it's important for young women to know that you have a range of people in your sphere who can help you in very different ways. And thank you for mentioning that it's important to ask if you don't see someone who's just with their hand up, you know? So the journey to leadership, from my experience, is a lifetime journey. And it's why we have an executive master's program, because people have been out for a lot of years and are coming back to learn some more. So it's a lifetime. And along the way, we make mistakes and we learn. And so I'm really curious what any of you, please feel welcome to answer, what you have learned along your journey of leadership about yourself, about how to lead, and any stories you have around that would be great. So Natalie, why don't you start?
Sure. I'd say the most important lessons that I can draw are, one is to hold space and welcome multiple perspectives, right? It's do not incubate yourself in an echo chamber, welcome perspectives, particularly those that are going to challenge your own the most. And even if you end up sort of sticking to your initial conviction, what that does, it further reinforces your sort of confidence in that decision that you've made. And so whether it be an unofficial board of advisors or my official board of directors, in the decisions that I make, I find it a real blessing to be able to go to these folks who I have deep trust in and who hold great expertise and experience to be able to seek that kind of input and guidance and perspectives that challenge my own. The other is to not be afraid of doing the work and realizing that that you can build the plane as you fly it. Many of us think that leadership is a destination work, but it's not. You have to really sort of roll up your sleeves and take the risks and allow sort of one step to unfold the next. And I think that is one of the tough lessons of leadership, is that you have to sort of have the patience to allow the journey to unfold itself. And so I'd say with that is holding space for risk and innovation with that, and not only for ourselves, but for our teams. I think as leaders, it's incredibly important to create space for the folks on our teams to fail. When our staff meetings, we have a weekly check-in item that is the big failures. So we hold space for members of our team to share their failures, because innovation and ingenuity are all born from risk. And to take risk requires us to absorb failure sometimes.
Absolutely.
That's great.
That's really, yeah, thank you very much. Actually, you read my mind, which is very dangerous to do, because I was going to ask down the road, let's talk about failure. But before we get there, would either of the senators like to talk about what you have learned and what you continue to learn along your journey?
So for me, leadership is about learning every day, and leadership is about not thinking you know everything, and it's really challenging. I remember when I became the president of my union, I thought, oh my gosh, I'm supposed to just put this cartridge in and know everything about being the leader of this union. And to develop the confidence to be able to say, you know what, I don't know, but let me find out. And I think that that's really a good quality for a leader. And then I also think it's incredibly important, as Natalie was talking about, is giving your staff the space to do what they need to do, because they bring you great ideas. When I was back at my local union and now in the Senate office in December, we take a whole day of planning. I call it the sausage making day. You don't want to see how it's made, but the end product is really good. And we spend the whole day saying, what did we do last year that worked really well? What do we want to change this year? And then also just planning out the whole year, because so many things are thrown at you that you'll get off track and you won't get to really pursue the goals that you want to pursue. And I think a lot of times, learn from your adversaries. I think that a lot of times we don't want to do that. I learned so much from the man that I worked for that didn't think I should have the job because I was a woman. What I learned from him is how I didn't want to be as a boss. And so that when I think that that's really valuable, to learn things that you don't want to do to people when you become a leader. And I would just say, learn. Don't be afraid to fail, and don't be afraid to say, I don't know.
Lovely. Really, really great. Any last comments? Any other?
Yeah, I just think the art of compromise is so
Yes.
hard for some of us, especially as I came in 2014 as a brand new elected leader, thinking I knew everything and I wanted 200% of this goal, but knowing that half of the council was not even 50% of that. And so it's very difficult to kind of pull yourself back sometimes, but you have to just be open-minded to be able to reassess and see, where you can find that middle ground, because oftentimes you're speaking the same language, you're saying the same thing, you're just not realizing you're saying the same thing. And so it has been, again, a really good to be able to do that, to kind of sit back and reassess. And then again, like you had mentioned, Connie, on the learning from your adversaries. I have a dad who's a devil's advocate. I'll say yes, he'll say no. It's just, but he constantly challenges me to kind of think deeper, which is always very good.
And I just have to say, a comment to what Lena said about compromise. Yes. And I think that so many people think that compromise is failure. And I think, especially in the job that we do, trying to get legislation passed, and you put something forward and you have to know that there are going to be changes that are made to that. I feel like many years in the labor movement, negotiating contracts really helped me and gave me a leg up when I got to the legislature. But you have to be able to compromise, because if you can't, I don't think you'll ever be an effective leader.
So, two of you have called out the importance of failure and learning from failure and risk and sausage, all three of you actually, and sausage making and so on. It's a new academic term.
Oh, we got lots of them on Team Labor.
Stick around after the panel.
Yeah. Plenty more.
Plenty more.
So, in order to help your teams risk, try, fail, they have to feel safe, psychologically safe, yes? It's nice to say we want to hear from people. It's another thing to create the environment in which your teams feel that they can trust, they can say, and that there's not going to be a punishment down the road. Can you talk to the audience about what you do with your teams to help build that kind of trusting or psychologically safe environment?
Well, you have to say what you mean and mean what you say. So if you tell your team that, hey, I want to hear your feedback, and even if you don't think I'm going to like it, tell me, then you have to be open to that. You can't say, tell me, and then get mad when they tell you. You have to say, and sometimes that's kind of hard. I've gotten older and more mellow when I was younger. I didn't really like to hear that I was wrong. But then you get a little older and you realize how valuable it is to hear someone else's perspective. And someone who also is there to help you. And this person isn't telling you this because they're trying to be mean. They're really trying to help you, and they're trying to help the team. So I think mostly you have to be open to the criticism. You can't say one thing and then do another, because they'll never open up to you again.
Okay, anything else? Otherwise, I will keep going.
I say I lean in very deeply into the leadership traits that are uniquely characteristic to women. Right up until the '60s, we were told that we had to be mothers and caregivers and teachers and doctors, and these were all nurturing roles. And men, in turn, had to be authoritative and adversarial and decisive, and those were the muscles that they were encouraged to build. But the muscles that we were encouraged to build as women, I think really translate powerfully into spaces of leadership. And so I lead as a collaborative leader, as an inclusive leader. I welcome the perspectives of the members of my team, because I ultimately hire folks who are smarter than I am in the verticals that they are trusted to run.
Yes.
Otherwise, I don't feel like I'm actually effective in my role. And then when I do that, I create space for them to fly, because that's what the organization's success and ultimately our region's success and the impact that we want to achieve depends on.
I think that's a really important message for people who are coming up and earlier in their careers, because so many organizations reinforce the idea that you're supposed to know, or you're put in a role and you think, I'm supposed to know everything, and what happens if I look stupid or I don't say the right thing? So I think the notion of hiring people who are wiser in their areas, than are smarter, more expert, is really, really important, because talent is everything, right? If you don't have the right talent, you don't get to the end result.
Very true.
So given that leadership is a lifetime journey, along the way, we also, as human beings, let go of things, right? We have to learn to let go of parts of ourselves, ideas, assumptions, etc. Who would like to first talk about what you've let go of, or what you're letting go of, what you're working on, to become a better leader?
I think I'll go. A couple things. I think I've let go of ego, because that is very difficult sometimes to let go of, but it's something that once you do let go of that and you realize that it's part of it too is compartmentalizing, right? Because you can't take everything personal, and you've got to think personal and professional. And when you receive feedback or when you give feedback or what have you, and sometimes it feels really personal,
Yes.
your ego kind of comes out, and it's, never makes for a really good interaction. But I think being able to just be a wiser person and understand that those are two different sets of vehicles, and that we're just hopefully keeping things very professional in that environment. But I've let go of that, I hope. You can ask my staff about that. But I've let go of that. That's been, it's difficult to do that. And I've just let go of some fear. You've just got to take risks. I think women are some of the best risk takers. We don't often see that in ourselves, but we are. We're risk takers at home. We're risk takers out with friends. We're risk takers, in the work that we do constantly. So I think letting that go and just moving ahead is important.
Thank you. Wonderful.
Letting go of who gets credit. I think it's
that's really important.
Really important to, when I got elected, no one in the Inland Empire, which is where I'm from, none of the electeds worked together. And everybody was kind of siloed, and everybody was worried about who got credit. And I would say I'm still working on that, because sometimes I still do like, hey, well, I did that. But consciously thinking about it really doesn't matter. And what matters is if we all work together,
Yes.
we all win together. And then also giving up when you're a woman and you get your picture taken 20 times a day of worrying about the way I look.
I need your help.
Oh my gosh. But you walk out of the house and you're like, man, that is such a cute outfit. I am looking great today. And then you see a picture and you're like, don't ever wear that again. Not good. Or you think your hair looks good and somebody takes your picture and like,
Yes.
so what I always just say, big smile, happy, and you're going to take bad pictures, and that's okay.
Yeah.
It is what it is.
Never take bad pictures.
No.
Every woman in this audience understands what you just said. Absolutely. So let me ask a different question. Unfortunately, women oftentimes set, unintentionally, barriers for themselves, right? It's usually not intentional. From your experience, what have you either experienced or observed that women often do gets in their own way? Self-imposed or unaware of the barriers that they've put in front of themselves.
Yeah, I'd say maybe three things stand out for me in that space. The first is actually a fear of taking up space, right? And the language and the approach that we're conditioned to take is to shrink, is to be apologetic about the spaces that we're taking, and to be apologetic in the language that we're taking. With that, I'd say also the second being not building our own brand and our own narrative. I think we are fully responsible for articulating our accomplishments, of course, doing that with a level of humility, but that is our responsibility. That's just one piece of work that we just can't hand off to anybody else, right? And it does require an element of sort of humble self-promotion, if you will, but really articulating our value, who we are, what our unique contributions are to our organizations, to our communities. And lastly, I would say is also jumping to the conclusion that we are in competitive spaces, because we're not. And sometimes we allow that narrative to inform us. And I think on the ground, we don't see each other as competition. I think on the ground, I see women all the time collaborating deeply. Sometimes we allow that unfortunate narrative to impact us, even though our actions on the ground are really incongruent with that. But I think fully embracing the narrative and the reality that we do live in a really collaborative network of women who are stepping up to support each other's leadership.
Which really defies a very traditional stereotype that used to be, and I'm going to say used to be, right, in the ether, which is that women will actually undercut one another. Right. And that's really great that you're saying that, because I think we all probably share observing and being collaborative, right, as opposed to living up to that old message.
But I would also say that we as women need to do a much better job of working together. Yes. There's a reason there's an old boys club, because they work together. There's no old women's club, because there might be, but but we really have to do a better job of working together. As the chair of the Women's Caucus, we have 38 women right now in the legislature, which is a historic high. Yes, that's great. But it's not that great, because there are 120 of us. We are 50% of California. We should be 50% of the legislature. Yes. So we have work to do. But we also have work to do. Lena is new to our caucus, but she's seen how that we don't always work great together. And we have to stop doing that to each other. We have to help women get the credit. Sometimes there was a bill last year that I couldn't carry, but I found a woman who could carry it so she could get the credit for it, and it would make her look good. And we need to do a better job of that. And as women, we have to stop putting each other down for the way we look. If you really think there's something wrong with, this woman has a piece of broccoli in her teeth, great. Pull her to the side and tell her that. But we have to stop talking about the way we dress. We have to stop talking about the way we look. We have to uphold each other, and every woman has value, and we all bring something to the table. So I think for me, in my role as a chair of the caucus, and also as a leader in the Senate, my job is to help all of the women succeed, and my job is to reach back and pull them up. So I think we all can work on that, and I think it might take a little while, but if we all do it, we can make it happen.
Wonderful.
200% agree with that, because yes, she said it so perfectly, but I would say the same thing. I mean, we can be so much better and so much more impactful when we do come together, because we're all dealing with the same issues.
Yes.
In different ways, but we're all dealing with the same issues, whether you're a mom, whether you're a daughter, whether you're getting paid less than your male colleague is, whatever it is, we're all dealing with this. And so we have a lot more similarities than we do have, than we have differences. I would also say that being a woman, when I first started in public service, I overworked myself. And I think that could also be a big barrier, because I thought I had to keep working harder and harder, like my male colleague. And I thought, he's making money, I've got to work harder. And he'd leave right at 5, and I'm still there at 8 o'clock, yep, thinking it was okay to do that. And so I think we often put too much burden to work hard on ourselves.
Totally agree.
Perfect.
Yes.
So that's a great segue into taking a look at the advice you would give women who are on the rise. We are all living in a world today with very few boundaries, right? It's 24/7 work and a lot of expectations, no matter what the field is, that we are all available, men and women. So that's a lovely jumping off point. Would you like to say more about advice around that you'd like to give women? And then let's take a look at what other advice we would like to give women who who are in the middle of their journeys or the beginning of their journeys? Anything more you'd like to say about balance or boundaries?
There's no balance, truly, but it's hard. It's really hard. But I would say, kind of in that same spirit, is we just have to work more efficiently. I always tell my staff, work smarter, not harder, whether man or woman, right? We've got to work smarter. I don't want you working on the weekends if you don't have to, or working before 8 a.m. or after 6 p.m. if you don't have to. We can do so much better when you're a little bit more efficient. And I think for women especially, because we unfortunately then go home, fortunately and unfortunately, then go home, take care of our kids. Yeah. And there's so much more left for us to do. We're caretakers. There's so many other things that we do. And so that I just want to ingrain in young women kind of coming up is that you've got time. Time, we just got to work together and build that efficiency so you're not overworking yourself.
I would totally agree with that. And for me, a long time ago, when I became the president of my union, so I was 35, and I decided you have to know what your priorities are. And if you don't prioritize your life, no one else is going to do it for you. And so for me, I said, you know what, my husband is first because I met him first and we've been together. Then my kids are next because I had them next. And then third is my career because that came third. But if I do it right, all of them will work together. But if not, know what your priorities are. And I would say to anyone who's coming up, anyone who's working now, your family is the most important thing. When I got elected to the Senate, I said, you know what, at the end of the day, I will not always be a senator. So I always tell people, call me Connie. I won't always be a senator, but I'll always be Connie. I want my family to still like me when I'm done. And for young women, for anybody, but mostly for young women, be confident earlier than I was confident. I feel like we wait a long time before we really like who we are. Embrace who you are, because all of you have a gift. You have something to share. Don't wait until you're 30 or 40 or 50. Embrace it and be who you are. And what Lena talks about, working hard and not smart, when I was at the local union as a union representative, the guys would go out I was the only woman, they'd go out for these like 3-hour lunches. And they're like, Leva, we're going to lunch. I'm like, cool, have a great time. And sometimes the president would be like, you need to come too. And I'm like, no, I actually have work to do and I want to go home to my family. And finding that balance, because then they'd all stay till 8 or 9 o'clock at night. And he expected, if you were the rep on duty, he expected you to be there until he left. Well, he didn't come in until 10. He took a 2 or 3 hour lunch, and so he'd leave at 8 o'clock. Well, I got there at 7:30. I would work through lunch because I wanted to go home and see my kids. So it took me a little while to figure, it took me a little while to let him know that I might not be on your time schedule, but I'm probably doing a good job, probably a better job than what you're doing. But don't be afraid to fight for yourself, and don't be afraid to fight for your family, because at the end of the day, they are the most important people.
Yeah, critical. Natalie?
I would agree completely, and sort of aligned with that is really define your values, and then make sure that your actions continue to align with those values. So if you value spending time with your family, do the reflective work of then looking at your calendar in that week. And I know my husband right now to my left is like, you're talking a big game. We have a problem here. So I'm not even going to look in that direction. But then look back in that week and reflect as, whether you really lived up to that value.
That's right.
If you value investing in women's leadership, think back a day, a week, a month, and what have you done to cultivate and support the women in your professional and personal life to advance that personal value and really do engage. And I mean, I journal, this very archaic practice that I will keep forever, but I journal because it is really important for me to engage in that ongoing practice of reflecting back to make sure that my actions are aligning with my values.
Yeah, it's so important. And we're all up here and we represent a very wide age range. And it sounds easy, and for young women who are starting, it's not as easy. I mean, we've learned through the School of Hard Knocks and a lot of reflection, right? So when you're early in your career and you're being bombarded with lots of demands from every angle, it's hard to do this, but that's what keeps you alive and healthy, right, at the end of the day. So, one more question before we go to, I believe, our digital polling pretty soon. Too often, people confuse who they are with what they do, right? And then we get to places in our life where our career takes a turn we didn't anticipate and are left with really deep questions and oftentimes pain. So can any of you talk about what you've done to break through that confusion of tying your work to your identity, that confusion of who I am as my job? So would any of you like to talk about what kind of work you do internally to kind of wrestle with that?
I always have lots to say, so I just don't want to.
Go.
So I think that this is something that's unique to women. We don't generally tend to be as tied to our job. Our identity isn't as tied to our job as it is for men. And I think that's because we play so many roles. Many times as women, we are a mom, we are a wife, we are caring for aging parents. So I think it's harder for women or easier, I should say, for us to not have our identity tied to our title. And I think that, I just think it's easier for women. I think men are a little more tied up in their title, makes them who they are, and they have an even harder time retiring, or they feel like when they walk away from that job that they're no longer who they were. But we're always still going to be mom, we're always still going to be a wife, we're always still going to be the caregiver for our parents. So I think women wear so many hats, it's a little easier for us.
Okay, all right, so that's a really optimistic and good perspective. Any other comments around this before we go to our polling?
I would say, in my social media, the first thing you'll see is not senator, it's mom and wife. And first and foremost, the mom part, because I'm always a mom at the end of the day. And I also like to be called Lena, not Senator. I'm like, who is that? That's still, interesting to me. But I also think that I'm certainly not tied to the title, but I'm certainly tied to the work. Because for me, I've always carried
That's a good point.
Social responsibility, ensuring that I'm giving back, even at Microsoft, this little tech firm that you may know about. Corporate social responsibility was my role, and working with underserved communities to provide STEM opportunities for them, and in South LA, and in Long Beach, and in Boyle Heights, and all these Pacoima, and that's true to who I am. And so I tie that deep core value work to who I am, but not the title, absolutely not.
Lovely.
That's a very good point.
Lovely. Natalie?
I'd say make sure to keep people in your life who keep your ego in check.
Yes.
Nothing is more dangerous than ego, and our own ego is the most dangerous of them all. So in a big Armenian family, it is very easy to get that checked very consistently. So I don't struggle with that. But I think it's admittedly, and I want to be very transparent, as an outcome-driven person, that is often a question that I grapple with, and the distinction that has helped me sort of navigate this is to distinguish my principles from my results, right? Mm-hmm. My principles, that's my compass, that's my values, that is the what guides me, and that is also what guides my results. But I can always go back to who I am, and that lives in my values and my principles. So I think just the divorcing of those things, the who I am from what I do, in reminding myself of that consistently is really important work.
I think that's a lovely segue to hearing from the audience. This is a really important topic, and once again, I think the message is we all continue to work on this. And the more successful one gets, the more seductive it can be to tie your identity to who you are. So clearly we are all a work in progress.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you for spending the evening with us. I'm here because my two daughters can't be here.
Nice.
Nice.
Growing up, my mom, yes, but also women like Senator Barbara Jordan, Congresswoman Shirley Chisholm, Maya Angelou, Ursula Burns, who was heading up probably one of the more important Fortune 500 companies. But what I wanted to ask you was to double back on something less personal. I'd like to take some nuggets home. Recently, I heard a speech by Ana Guerrero, who is the mayor's chief of staff, which I'm trying to get a copy of. in terms of books, persons, events, that I could perhaps take home and say, like, back in the day, it was what color's your parachute. So what is perhaps the new thing that I can share with my two girls?
Who would like to jump in first? And that includes, you said also books, is that correct? Okay. Anyone want to share?
Is that specific to women's leadership or just generally?
Generally.
Okay, well,
Go ahead.
I'm sure that this is something that they have already read, but Michelle Obama's book, I think she touches on so many of the challenges and realities and opportunities of being a woman in leadership, being a mother, of negotiating your needs as a woman. I mean, for those who read it, she really articulates, after having some work experience and, not being able to necessarily, not having it crafted in a way that was ideal for her, she negotiated with her employer, and it went beyond salary, negotiated for the space to actually be a mother and to have the time with her kids. So really thinking about maybe a very relevant women's issue negotiation through the lens of Michelle Obama's experience.
That's great. Thank you. Another book that is short, easy to read, and important. Robert Palmer wrote a book, Let Your Life Speak. And we don't know the ages of your daughter, but we all need to learn over our lifetimes how to let our life speak. Mm-hmm. And so there's another idea for you. Okay, thank you. Let's go to another question. Harley?
Hi, I'm 21 years old, and I'm actually a senior in undergraduate, about to graduate this May.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
So I started my first job this summer, full-time at a consulting firm. And you talked a little about this balance between personal life and this work life. And I think the narrative for people my age has fundamentally stayed the same, but sort of switched, where we have this sort of timeline where we're like, okay, I need to work first. I need to work, and then by the time I'm 23, I'll get my promotion. By the time I'm 25, I'm this whole idea.
Yes.
And then by, I need to meet my husband by the time I'm 27 so that I can have kids by the time I'm 30. So my question is, what is your immediate reaction to that? And also, how do we break the stigma that you can't have both? You can't have this business life, this work life that's strong, and a family or personal life that you want.
Can I jump in first just to say, you said you're going into consulting?
Yes.
So I want you to do something for yourself. Get rid of the word balance, because I know consulting really well, and you will be working 120 hours a week. Yes. So just give yourself a little permission to take some time at 21 to work really, really hard, and then think about those other things. So now to the other. And several of us have millennial children, so we understand. So.
I would say don't put so much pressure on yourself. Congratulations, you're graduating. You're 21, so you probably did it in 4 years. Yay, not everyone does that.
Yay.
I didn't do it in 4 years. I was on the 5.5, kind of maybe 6-year plan. But you know what? However you do your life is what's right for you. We had our kids young, and that wasn't my plan. I was going to get married when I was 30 and think about having kids later, and then shoot, at 25, I'm having twins, and I'd been married for 4 years. And so just don't put so much pressure on yourself, because you're right, we think we've got to chunk things out. You know what? You never know who you might meet somebody soon. You might meet somebody later. But kind of just go be you. Go figure out what you want to do, and just don't put pressure on yourself. Whatever you do will be right for you.
Great.
I'm the outlier on the graph. Kid at 19, then got graduated at 28 from Cal State Long Beach, then had an epiphany and graduated again with my MBA in 2017. Had another child. I have a child in community college and one in preschool, so horrible timing. But I would say the same thing is that, I had this whole life, I'm gonna have a child at 30, I'm gonna get married at this time. Just got married last year, by the way. And so I would say just leave it open. I think it's the more you put pressure on yourself, the more you feel guilty when you don't hit those marks.
That's right.
It's kind of like my non-dairy diet. It's not going to happen, Lena. So let's not put so much pressure on yourself. One step at a time. It's not going to happen.
That's great.
I remember this period, this like almost graduation period. I remember it actually being one of the most anxiety-ridden periods of my life because I did want to plan everything out, right? And particularly if you're a planner and this is a particularly sort of challenging time, the best piece of advice I got in this particular moment in my life was a mentor who said, plan the next year or two and allow that year or two to plan the year and two after that.
Ooh, that's
right?
very good advice.
And it was really incredibly sound advice that I would anchor myself to every time I felt the need to plan 10, 15 years ahead.
Beautiful.
That's great advice.
That's great advice.
Yes.
So let's go to another question. Katie, do you want to grab someone from this side of the room and then we'll go back over here?
Hi there, good evening, and thanks again for being here.
Our pleasure.
The question I have is that the world is changing, and it changes by the minute, by the second. And we have seen now a lot more women in leadership roles running countries. What I wanted to know from the three of you, with your permission, and the fourth of you, is how are you preparing for global leadership as we are becoming more and more integrated around the world? And how do we, as you know, I always say that at some point we have to see ourselves as individuals as opposed to men versus women or women versus men, because some of these women are running these incredible countries. So are there any global leaders that you're looking at, that you're learning from, that you're mentoring? You say, wow, this is what I would like to see and do for the U.S. and outside the U.S. so we can all have a better world, not just the U.S.
That's right.
Yes.
I would say we're ready. We're ready in the United States for a female leader, for a female president. But I will also tell you this, I worry that we're ready, and we're ready in this room, and we can do it and do it effectively. But I remember when President Barack Obama was running, when he was a senator, and Hillary Clinton was running. And I thought, ultimately, and I love Barack Obama. I got to be on his drafting committee and whatnot, and I think he was an incredible president. And he was an incredible president, but now in comparison to what we have, it's like, wow, okay. But I think that I remember at that time thinking that our country is more sexist than it is racist. And then just after the Iowa caucuses, seeing Pete Buttigieg come out ahead. I don't know what the final numbers were, and him talking about his husband being the first man. And I remember thinking just the other day, wow, would the first man be with a man and not because he's married to a woman? So I think we're still very sexist in this country. We're ready. We can do it. We women have shown at every level that we can lead and do it effectively. But I don't know what's wrong with our country in some regards. And we are still a very racist country. I don't want to make it sound like we're not, but those comparisons to me were very stark when we're picking the next leader of our country.
Yeah. I think also, just let me tag on, going back to the question that we just heard from the young lady who's graduating, if you're in the early stage of your career, get international experience. Yes. Go live somewhere else. Yes. You don't have to stay there forever, but in this global world, we have to get out of ourselves. We have to get really uncomfortable and learn different things. And so that's just a piece of advice. I think Harley, yes. Oh.
I was going to say I'm a male, so don't hold it against me. But
we love
50
men.
years ago, I was very fortunate to have met some really, really smart Chicanas. I met a young Dolores Huerta. I met a young Francisca Flores. I met a young Gloria Molina. Anyway, I can go on and on and on. I went to the founding of the Comisión Femenil in Santa Barbara in February of 1972, about close to 50 years ago. And I was so impressed that I still have connections with, in fact, we had a little party for Dolores Huerta about a few years ago on her 85th birthday. And for the gentleman that was asked, there's a book on her life. I think there's a film on her life,
yes.
Dolores,
Yes.
2012.
Yes.
And I think a professor at Santa Barbara just wrote a book on her life So you should get that. That book is really, really important. But in 1952, she got a master's degree as a Chicana. And afterwards, she had to stop because she was seeing her kids going to school without, basically sandals or not even shoes, you know what I'm saying? So that she quit and she formed the United Farm Workers with Cesar Chavez. So anyway, I just want to let you know.
Thank you.
I was so fortunate to have met that. Now, did any of you meet somebody like that? I mean, like, Yolanda now is just
Huerta,
incredible.
She is an amazing woman. At 85, she'll run circles around all of us.
Yeah.
I mean, when you talked to her at the last election cycle, she was telling you about how many doors she'd knocked on and how many people. I mean, she should be an inspiration to all of us.
Obama gave her the
Yes.
the one that what's the name got that
presidential
didn't deserve it, right?
Yeah, he didn't deserve it. That's exactly right.
That's great. Harley, I think we have a question in the back. Oh. We're going to
Really
get there, I
fast, just on
promise.
equal
We're going to
pay.
get there.
Just equal pay. We have a daughter who's working, and I can't take her calls anymore because she found out that all the men make double or triple, and that women were sabotaging her, and I don't take the calls anymore. And she's going to figure it out, but I'd love tricks.
Where
to tell
does your
her.
daughter work, if you feel like sharing?
Yeah, she works, I can't tell you because one of it's a government
Okay.
agency, and she manages 5 states, so I think she'd be mad.
Is she here in California?
Yes.
She can feel free to reach out to me.
Thank you.
And I would be
and
happy
it's a
to try
whole
and help
story,
her.
so that would be great. And
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah, get my information and I would be happy to help her. We've passed a lot of legislation on equal pay and whatnot, but some of it is just the tricks.
Oh, thank you so much. I have a question. I think this is really for you, Dr. Geffner, because you study leaders. And my question is about a gap in understanding I find between men and women who are leaders. A couple of years ago, I called a woman into my office who worked for me. She was a regional manager, and I questioned her expense report because I noticed whenever she traveled, she ordered room service for every meal. And she told me that when she would eat in the hotel restaurant, when she was traveling alone, she didn't feel safe.
Yeah.
So my question for you, Doctor, and for the senators and CEO, is what can we as men who are leaders do to help female leaders feel safe?
Great questions.
It's a really good question.
Thank you. That's a great question. Let me turn to the panelists.
I think it's just what you did. I think it's kind of, I don't want to oversimplify it, but I think it's asking those questions because oftentimes we get answers that are a little bit surprising. You know, on the report it looks one way, but you know, when you actually communicate with that person and find out the real reason why they're feeling this way, if it's, you know, warranted, then absolutely, it makes perfect sense. And, you know, I think as women, also, it's, you know, we often are in places with men and we feel unsafe in some cases, or we're in, you know, a conference or what have you. And I've traveled a lot on the private side as well as publicly. And I think, you know, good leadership is just being able to communicate, you know, together. And so I don't really have anything else to say other than that, but I think it's just, you know, what you did. But being able to understand that after the fact, once you've said that, I think the bad leader just will assume that she just wants to run up the bill. The good leader would actually sit there and understand that and kind of sit back and kind of devise a plan after that.
And think about where you're sending her. You know, she's traveling, is she going to be with mostly men? Is it a conference where it's mostly men? When I was with the UFCW and I would travel across the country, I was with mostly men. And so if you know that, I don't know what the budget is, but is it possible to send her with someone? Is it possible to, you know, send 2 people so that she has a wing person? Because I tell women that a lot. Don't go by yourself. Have a wing person. Because, you know, even as recent as a couple weeks ago at the Capitol, there was yet another incident of a young staffer who was grabbed and approached and grabbed by a lobbyist who had had too much to drink. So you just, thank you for being cognizant of it, and just kind of think about where you're sending her, and if it is possible to send her with someone else from the company.
Right. It's great advice. And also just to piggyback, you know, leadership always starts with me. Right? It always starts with who we are. And so, again, the fact that you even recognize that, that's really the most important step, because in many instances, an individual wouldn't recognize that, that you needed to ask questions, right? So just as you've heard, I don't think there's a magic, but it's being willing and open to asking the questions so that a person can feel safe. Thank you for that. That's a really important question. Thank you.
Very
Oh.
Hi, thank you so much for giving us your time this evening. It's really appreciated as someone who's kind of trying to burgeon into the political sphere herself. But my main question is you were discussing earlier how women should be supporting women in their workplaces. I was wondering if you could give some advice specifically, because as a white woman, I still have a lot of privilege in a workspace due to the color of my skin. So how do we help more marginalized communities, women of color, trans women, queer women, in our workspaces so that all of us women go up together and not just a certain demographic?
Beautiful. Great question.
Be there for them. I am a white woman also, and I see it as my job is to help women of color because I do have more privilege. So be there for them. Be their wing person. Be the person that's championing them. Be the person who says, you know what, I think she would do a great job. So be there for them.
Excellent.
Yeah. And with that, sort of hold space for their contributions to shine, and celebrate those contributions, support them to sort of showcase those contributions and build their brands and their narratives with your support, and sort of know when to step back and to step up to support them.
And if I can add,
Yes,
someone like Connie Leva, who, yes, she may be a white woman, but she's a fantastic, amazing, fierce woman that actually supports a lot of issues related to women of color. You think of, low-wage workers who are primarily Latina, issues of, equity in education. I mean, she's somebody that certainly stands up and not just kind of is a yes vote. She'll stand up and be bold and, be right there with us. And I have to shout that out because it's very important to do that. Which is important because, the work that you do, sometimes you feel alone as a Latina woman. I'm like, okay, as like my African-American women friends, API, they kind of feel alone. Like we're the only ones here saying this, who's with me, and it's nobody. Or they think, that she's always talking about the same thing. And to have a friend that's able to sit there, and be with you in the fight is so very important. So similar to what they've mentioned, just be there for them. Be outspoken.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you. We're going to take one last question. And where is it? Oh, there you go.
Well, thank you as well for your time. My question is, I see all of you are very resilient, persistent, and those are characteristics that I see in common. But when you hit an obstacle or when you find yourself in a place where you can really find a window or a door, what drives you? What's your motivation to keep going and stay positive and keep a good mindset? What do you do?
Who would like to jump at that first?
Sure. I'd say that, to me, leadership is synonymous to problem solving. So when there is a challenge, to be effective, you got to dive into it head first and go into solution mode. Another piece of advice that I received that was one of the most simplistic pieces of advice that is, I share it all the time at home, is just keep your feet moving. Keep your feet moving, and the path will reveal itself.
Beautiful.
And sometimes just have a good cry. I mean, seriously. Sometimes you have a really bad day, and when I was in Sacramento, or still am, and go back to my little apartment by myself and sit there and have a little bit of a good cry, and then say, okay, get off the pity pot and get up tomorrow and fight another day.
There you go. There you go. And one last piece of advice is make sure you're getting support.
Yes.
Because none of us do this alone, right? So make sure you're talking with your friends or whomever it is so that you can get other voices in your head. Yes.
Yeah, that's
so,
true.
By the way, I've been told we can have a couple of more questions.
Good, we like
and
questions.
So here we are.
Good evening again. Thank you for being here and for allowing us to learn more about your experiences and your resiliency and how you are helping lead that path for many of us. So my question, not necessarily only for the legislators tonight, but Natalie, please feel free to jump in. Last year, you passed legislation requiring that women be on boards, corporate boards specifically. So it's easy to do. It's easy to just pass legislation, but tell me.
No, it's not.
Well, okay.
No, it's not. I was there for the floor count.
Okay.
Yeah, it was
Call
not-
the absent members. Call the absent members.
I would
It was freaking
agree.
hard to get to 21.
Thank you for that.
You're welcome. Sorry, I just had to say
no,
that.
that's okay. But what
It's
are you
hard.
doing to actually make sure that you're preparing us to be on those corporate boards? And how many can we say we've gone on a corporate board? Because I'd like to be on one.
We'd like you to be on one
Yes.
too. So, I would just say that Senator Hannah Beth Jackson has just been an absolute stalwart champion on women's issues. She's termed out this year. She will be greatly missed in the Senate. And what was really fascinating about that bill was watching it work its way through the different committees and working its way to the other house, and to hear people get up and say this is wrong and we shouldn't dictate women on boards, and kind of what our mantra was, well, we've let you have it your way for 100 years and you haven't been able to figure it out, so now we're going to tell you what we think you should do. And we already know that other states are doing it. Other states are emulating that. We also know that there's a lawsuit saying that it stifled some of the growth. But we've also heard from people, Senator Jackson has said she's heard from people who have said, we've added women to my board. We never had a woman on the board. We have women on our board now. So what we can do is pass that legislation, but some of it is you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. And there are companies and corporations out there that are gonna fight this tooth and nail, and we just have to keep persevering.
Yeah, I would say coming from a corporation as well,
Yes.
I think what I do, I actually just got a text from my former boss at Microsoft, and I push names to him because he is high up there. He's 2 from the CEO. And so I'm constantly personally pushing names to him on my own personal time because I want to make sure he knows that there are a vast amount of overqualified women that should be on these boards and that have the capability of really making change there, like Brisa. And so I think it's important not just for us to sit and push, on the commission level on the state side, but really to ensure that we're pushing women on the corporate side. Just like our judges, we have a lack of women of color in our Superior Court judge, space. We don't think about those spots. We're always thinking about the city councils. We're thinking about the state legislature. We're not thinking about the corporate boards or these other spaces where women really need to shine. So we've got to lift that up together.
Excellent.
Great point.
And I just also want to take a moment to plug Betsy Burkheimer-Cordere and Renee Frazier, who behind the scenes have been doing work to advance this particular mission for a very long time. And Betsy has numerous books that support women to learn more about how to serve on boards, including to start with nonprofit board service and to sort of start building their brand and their leadership and the unique expertise and value that they can bring to these various boards. So for folks interested,
Excellent.
I think that'd be good reading.
Yes.
Thank you for those great insights. Okay, now we're down to the last question, I believe.
I am the last question. My name is Ethel Rubio, class of 95, School of Architecture. I am a Filipino American, and by default, I've become part of the PhilAm leadership because of my other community involvements. With the decision that was made yesterday, it was just kind of disheartening that happened, when in fact, there should have been a way to bring the bipartisan, not talk about bipartisan, but what's really right? So in your thoughts, what do you think women can put on the table so that they can be influencers for decisions like that, rather than fighting bipartisanly, so that we can really make a difference and impact to our children's future? So, if you're a Democrat or Republican, it doesn't matter. It's the principle, right?
right.
But how can you turn over those 3 votes or 4 votes that could have made a big difference? What do you think women could have done differently or could have impacted that decision from your level? Thank you.
I think that women are natural organizers. I think that we're really good at getting people together. And I also think that women can be very good peacemakers. And I think that sometimes we will go in with a different tone and a different tact. And I think that just, in my 6 years in the legislature, I've seen women do a good job of bringing people together. And I think that if we had more women in the Senate, they may have been able to change some minds. But I also think we're just in a really hard place in our country, that we've become so partisan and so divided. And look what's happened to, because I'm thinking you're referring to the vote yesterday, right? Yeah, look at Mitt Romney, who got up and, voted, yeah, right? Exactly. And, that took a lot of courage, and to have no other Republicans that could show that courage. I mean, right is right and wrong is wrong. I have voted against my caucus when I didn't feel we were going in the right direction, but it really takes courage. I don't think that's even a man or a woman issue. We need people with courage. Mm-hmm.
I think that's a beautiful wrap to the evening. And I want to thank Connie and Lena and Natalie for being here this evening and sharing your expertise, your insights. And I want to thank you for taking your evening and being here to explore. And I'm sorry if we missed a couple of people with questions, and want to wish you a lovely evening and thank everybody who has worked really hard to make tonight a success. So to the team that's behind the scenes, thank you very much.